one of the things that my hobby was as I was doing biophysics research was playing with the largest, most complicated system that humans have ever made, which is the global phone network. It's become a global internet. And what was interesting to me was treating that as a complex system like a brain or like the internet that you can poke and see how it responds. And it's endlessly entertaining from a hacking point of view. So what I thought I'd focus on in terms of what's worth doing is the trends that are happening whether we're here or not, and focusing on paying attention to swimming downstream as opposed to swimming against the flow of water. And life is easier if you're going with the flow of things and following some trends that I'll touch on. My background is in biophysics, and that's essentially applying math to biology. And biology is not predictable, it's not consistent, it's not deterministic. It's slightly different than physics. And so it's a dance of trying to define things mathematically that are not mathematically consistent. I started out doing how the brain works and how the brain is malfunctioning, in, for example, in schizophrenia, by using external sensors to measure what's going on inside, and in this case, PET imaging, which is making pictures using radioisotopes of sugar, in this case, of what areas of the brain are working less or more based on how much sugar they're using, and making a picture three-dimensionally of what's happening inside the brain, normal or abnormal or different states of thought. And one of the things I learned after doing this for a long time is you can measure a lot of things that don't really mean anything, and that the high tech of big budget science, of fancy brain imaging, is to some extent a modern version of phrenology. So for those of you who remember phrenology, it's if you have a bump on this side of your head, you're probably an aggressive, evil person who might do something wrong, and the bumps over here, you might be great. But it turns out that those, at best, were correlations that the bump here didn't necessarily cause you to do something. In many cases, there's things that are going on inside the head where we assume that what we're seeing is a cause and effect, or maybe a highly correlated, but it turns out not. This, for example, is a picture of the brain of a functionally normal person who has a job, who has kids, who has a family, but you can see they have almost no brain. And this person didn't know they didn't have much of a brain until they went in and got a brain image. And it turned out that they had hydrocephalitis, which had more or less crushed their brain to just the edges. But from a social point of view, and from a functional point of view, and from their own personal point of view, they were normal. And so there's a lot of things that we assume that, oh, well, the brain is really important to being normal, where you can have it massively crushed down to about 25% of its normal area and still be performing normally. And so this concept of intelligence and brains and brain-body ratio, there's a cute chart by Edward Tufte that is essentially body mass by brain mass on a double exponential chart. And the ratio of brain mass to body mass is more or less a predictor of how smart somebody or something is, in that brain size to body size. If you have extra brain cells, you maybe can use them for intelligent things. And creatures that don't move don't have brains. So plants, which can be fairly smart from a survival point of view, they don't have brains, they don't need brains. There's even some creatures that have brains when they're in their larval state and they find a place to be. First thing they do is they put down the roots and then they eat their brain, and they don't eat it after that. And socially, we consider intelligence in high regard, and brains is very important. But there's this interesting line where the humans and dolphins, crows, and bats are sort of the upper extremity of this line, and there are no creatures in a higher level of intelligence. And so it's a kind of an indication that intelligence is not the end-all and be-all of living creatures, and it's maybe not as important as we think. Certainly, plants get along pretty well with no brains and allegedly no intelligence. And so this, I find it very curious and interesting to me. And you notice on this chart, human females, which are physically slightly smaller and have similar sized brains, have a higher brain-body ratio than human males, which have a similar sized brain but a slightly larger body. So by this analysis, human females are smarter than human males. And so we have, what's it mean to be, like what we're doing as far as from our personal satisfaction point of view. And there's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where at the base level is food and water and shelter, and at the top, sort of self-esteem and self-actualization. And many people spend their lives trying to work their way up this pyramid. And in these modern times, things have changed a little bit. Most people would consider Wi-Fi more important than food and water. In fact, more people have internet access and phones than have toilets. However, with Wi-Fi by itself, it isn't enough that you have to have battery to be able to do anything. And then if you have Wi-Fi and battery, well, you have a charger. And then if you have all these things, well, what are you connected to? And so the hierarchy of what we consider important, as far as being part of a citizen of the internet, which is beyond the boundaries of any nation state, is kind of a change in priorities from even a short time ago. The processing on a single exponential chart, where this is an exponential axis and that's time, the technology has been evolving at this exponential pace of more or less doubling in capability a year or so. And this has been going on for over 100 years, independent of Moore's law, with punch cards and card weaving machines and so forth. And that there seems to be a natural law of complexity, of increasing complexity that is going along in terms of mechanical technology or electrical technology that's somewhat similar to the evolution of biology. So as I was touching on the phone club, homebrew club that originally started actually with people who were more interested in phone hacking than making computers, and including John Wozniak, in that the main activity of the homebrew club was making blue boxes and black boxes, and at one time you could blow a whistle that came as a prize in a cereal box into a phone at just the right moment. And the worldwide phone network would turn into maintenance mode, and then you could call anywhere you wanted for free, until the phone company figured out that people were doing this on a regular basis. So they made it make 2 tones into that, and thus boxes were born to do 2 tones. And this has been a continuing game for the last 50 years. In the 80s, when the Macintosh first came out, there was sort of the normal way that you do these things. And what was worth doing at that time was, well, how can you make it better? How can you make it more personal? And so a derivative of the homebrew club was the BMUD group in Berkeley, which was how do you take a computer and make it better and make it more useful to problems that people identified that Apple hadn't thought of at the time. Sort of an extension of that is Singularity University, which is playing on this exponential improvement in technology and how do you apply these sort of naturally improving things to solving problems at scale, a billion people scale, that are focused mostly on humans in this case, but not particularly national-centric. And turns out there are several kinds of technologies that are on this exponential improvement pace. Here's another, which is the called Marty Cooper's law, which is the speed at which you can send things on a wireless network. So from Morse code in the days of the Titanic to ordinary phones to cell phones to iPhones and so forth. This also has been on a very consistent, twice as good every year kind of pace for over 100 years. And some things are going even faster than a doubling. In this case, the ability to read DNA, which is the software of life, and that the white line is doubling per year, and recently the ability to read DNA, which uses computers and microscopes and chemistry and memory and a lot of technologies that are improving exponentially, is actually getting better at about 4 to 5 times faster than Moore's law. So some of these core technologies happen to be improving at a pace that allows you to solve problems that were inconceivable to even attempt before. So for example, computers, which you program at the electrical level with ones and zeros, and higher level languages to program the ones and zeros, there's a parallelism in biology that biology is programmed in DNA, and DNA is a 4-base code that is the software that runs living computers or living things. And so the programming of computers and the programming of biology is very similar, as long as you can read and write the code. And the code itself either runs in a computer or phone or runs in a living thing. So if you can reprogram biology, you can change the meaning of homebrew, that you, for example, change the software in the yeast that's in the beer that you brew in your garage, which is homebrew. But recently, a group at Berkeley took the genes that are in opium poppies that make opiates, and they copied those genes and they pasted them into yeast, so that you can put the yeast into beer, add water, and it brews heroin. So the world of programming biology is going to change very fast, and the tools are changing faster. So the topic that I'm focused on here is complexity. So these things I've just mentioned are kind of complex, but not really in the big picture. And the missing piece I thought would be interesting to think about in terms of what's we're doing is what we do with free will. And is our free will really free, or is it just our rationalization of things that we'd be doing anything like breathing? So here's a biological digital interface where the software in the biology is saying eat those bugs, and the bugs in the software is saying I look like a biological bug. And the thing is biology has deterministic properties like this, but sometimes it has a little bit of free will. And it doesn't, biology doesn't always do what you program it to do. And the more complex the biology gets, the more free will it seems to have. And you sort of get to the complexity level of humans, which are developing this biological human interface of brains and phones. And a lot of attention is, well, how can I do direct brain interface inside the brain? But what's more direct than like right between your face and your hand? And you can change it every day if you want. Or if you plant something in your head, it's going to be out of date in a year or two. So phone or internet and phones and people are becoming integrated as a combined thing. Not just at the edge where we have a digital interface in our hand, but deep in the network. The old phone networks used to be switched by humans. FedEx routing stations or Amazon stores are combinations of humans and packaging computers as part of a hybrid Internet of Things, moving things, not the marketing term Internet of Things. And there's a protocol that says the transmission control protocol, or how am I going to send something to you, either an idea or a thing. And then the internet protocols, how will we share amongst each other. And once these protocols became somewhat standardized, it allowed the internet to grow and created a whole environment for new things that hadn't been conceived of. And this was worth doing. And there's a next generation of these kind of things that I believe are worth doing, where the internet protocols were how are things connected amongst routers. There's the moving things in that how just matter or physical things get moved from place to place. And this is just starting to emerge in much the same way as personal computers and internet was 30 years ago. But drones are essentially inevitable in that things between helicopters and cars and birds that are programmable, that fly themselves, that are autonomous, that you shouldn't be able to take your phone out and throw it up in the air. It should fly around, take your picture, and go back to you. That there's most of the compute power and batteries and so forth are already in there. The only thing that's missing in your phone is the propulsion system. So the inevitability of drones being in our pocket, in delivering our food, carrying people around is worth it. Another internet-like thing that is of personal interest to me is a limbic internet, where how do feelings get spread in a network-type way, in that the protocols of things like music or art or architecture or emotions or empathy, how can this be encouraged so that empathy and feelings spread globally, independent of national boundaries, independent of regular rules, but more in a sort of a biological, organic way. And then, of course, there's the ecology that already exists, which is the food system and the food webs and pollution and the other things related to that. Those are all worth doing, in my opinion. Which sort of brings to the origin of life, in that this is an area that I think is worth considering, in that did life start here on this planet? That's the default assumption. But the elements that make up life, carbon and oxygen, nitrogen and stuff, are too heavy to have been formed by this sun. So the elements of life did not start here. They didn't start from this solar system. They didn't start this sun. They came from somewhere else. And so the assumption that life had to have started on this planet is kind of a weak assumption, in that almost certainly the parts started somewhere else and they arrived here. So we're looking for life, or we're looking for other planets that might support biochemical life. That yellow triangle is the search view of the Kepler telescope, which is a pretty small amount of space in the direction that we're headed, that we might find another planet that we need. And there's a lot of thought about, well, we should move to Mars, or we should move to another planet. But if we're going to move off this planet, we might as well just stay in space. There's no reason to go back on a planet where we can be functionally living outside of the gravity well. So I'll sort of wind up with, well, what is consciousness that comes out of life, and where does that come from? And that in the Big Bang, if the elements of life were created not here, the components of life didn't necessarily get created here. So life itself may have been created in part of this evolutionary process of matter. And that here's another exponential chart with time and an exponential measure of complexity of life. And if you just plot the complex life forms on this planet, from single-cell organisms to mammals and so forth, draw a straight line through it, it turns out it's not zero when this planet started 4.5 billion years ago. It's actually closer to 10 billion years ago, where if you just predict the complexity of life backwards, which is another indication that life didn't start here. So what is life? What is consciousness? There's a guy at MIT named Max Tegmark who posits that life and consciousness is just another form of matter, sort of like steam and liquid and solid. And then you go up a chain of complexity into life and consciousness, and that life and this consciousness may have originated more than 4.5 billion years ago and not on this planet. We already heard a little bit about consciousness. These are sort of the medical definitions as they are, whether you personally are arousal and responsive and you understand what is being said, but another extension of that is are you connected to a community or not? So some people may be conscious but not connected to their community, and so from a medical point of view, they're not really fully conscious. So the last slide here is the activity of the brain cells of the internet. So these are all the routers on the internet over a 24-hour period. And this is essentially a picture of, or a movie, of the internet being awake and asleep in different parts of the world. And so the red is high activity, the blue is low activity, and this is going around the world, more or less, with the sun, where when people are awake and they're active on the internet is busy and the routers are hot. When people are asleep, the routers are cool, and there's little hot spots in the blue areas, which are like the Google data centers and YouTubes. And that's essentially the internet dreaming while it's asleep. And the rest is the internet being awake. And so this is a complicated system that's worth playing with, and so that's worth doing. So let's go stop.